Join me, Harriet Gould, for the Lab Matters podcast to hear fascinating stories every week from the inspiring people behind the science. Join me in the next episode as Geoff Mackey talks me through a career that's included practically everything from managing bingo halls to directing corporate affairs and sustainability at BASF. So today we have got Geoff Mackey with us. Geoff, you are the Sustainability Director at BASF, as well as spending more than 20 years there in other positions. You chair the Climate Education Group. You sit as VC for Plastics Europe, and you're on multiple boards and act as consultant to many companies. And you've also been a bouncer and built schools in Africa and played rugby fairly extensively. And I can't wait to hear about all of it. So let's start with your degree.
Thank you very much. Hello, Harriet. How you doing? I suppose, as they say, it all started a long, long time ago. My degree was at Liverpool Polytechnic, because I did so appallingly badly in my A levels, thanks to the fact that I was concentrating on the important things in life, which was rugby and weight training, that I decided to give passing exams competently a goodly miss. So I finished up in Liverpool doing applied biology, which turned itself into ecology. And I did a sandwich degree, as it used to be called. So I had a year out as part of my 4-year degree.
Gosh. And you didn't go straight there. You grew up on a farm, is that right? So you kind of ecology through and through.
Well, I suppose I would always regard the huge majority of farmers and primary producers as knowing more about their environment than most people. And I was certainly brought up in a small traditional family farm in South Armagh, Northern Ireland. It was kind of one of those things. I mean, let's be very clear. The 70s and 80s in Northern Ireland and South Armagh, people can read about what went on, but when you're a young when you're a young man being brought up, it's just normal what goes on around you.
Exactly. I often think that. Um, Still pretty hard to compare changing your life now to what might have happened then. Um, so back to Liverpool, you were there. How did you find? You say you did a sandwich degree. What did you do in the year in between, dare I ask?
Well, the year in between, I finished up working in Wales for MAF, as it was then, in the mammal research side of things. I was radio tracking foxes and moles and rabbits all over mid Wales. So, for example, it was actually part of the mammal research team, and it was before we had a channel tunnel. So, one of the projects we were involved with was radio tracking and checking what we could do with foxes, because there was a theory that foxes could bring rabies to the UK through the channel tunnel. So I used to work with a wonderful little Welshman called Bernie Price, and Bernie was about 5 foot tall, and at the time I was well over 6'1", and we used to spend our time wandering around forest tracks with bucketfuls of chicken heads, and we'd leave them out for the foxes, and then we'd track where the foxes went. And this was all part of the research looking at the home range, how far foxes traveled. The thought was that if ever they get through the Channel Tunnel, we could actually bait them and destroy them. To be awfully honest, the foxes got to the stage where they would wait for us in the morning to bring their breakfast. So we'd be wandering up these forest tracks, carrying 2 bucketfuls of chicken heads, and these foxes would be kind of standing there, stamping their feet, going, "Oi, where's our breakfast? You're late." So it made for an interesting way to spend a year.
I should think it did. So then you went back to Liverpool and finished your degree. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it for me as a an old-fashioned country boy, going to the big city was part of the experience, and Liverpool was quite a place. It was a party town, and apart from the obvious partying, I also got into my sports. I was playing rugby, which has already been mentioned, but I also picked up something called American football, which was very big in the 80s. And I played for a team headquartered in Toxteth called the Mersey Centurions. And yeah, it was an excuse for cocktails of an evening.
It sounds brilliant. Um, and then you graduated.
Yeah, I mean, I think much to my surprise and everybody else's, because actually I was really into my topic. I mean, one of the great tricks of education is if you love what you do, it's not a job, is it?
Exactly.
And therefore, from my side of things, I've always been a green environment person, one way or the other. Certainly, my final year project looked at metal pollution in trees in arboriculture, and I was working in ecology and had all sorts of weird and wonderful ideas of what I was going to do next. Um, our journey is all part of the conversation, you know?
Indeed, it is. So did you have an idea about what kind of job you wanted?
Well, because I was really into my environmental science, I actually applied to do a doctorate. Um, However, I then found out that because I was from Northern Ireland at that stage, I was classified as a foreign student, and they wouldn't give me a grant to stay on. And as you do, I got lucky and I got selected, and I went to the US to play American football for for the rest of that year. Um, and I arrived home. When I say home, I flew into Heathrow and then bounced off into Belfast. So my mum and dad picked me up. I'd come in from Hawaii. I was bronzed, I was lean, I was fit, and the first thing my father said was, "What have you done to your hair?"
What
As you do.
happened to it?
Well, I had trim lines down each side and my number cut into the side of my head, as you do.
What was your number?
I think it was 72. I
72.
think I'd actually have to check my old team jersey. It's just one of those things. So I mean, I landed back at home. That was before Christmas, and got picked up and went home for Christmas.
Went home for Christmas. So you're a American football star. You're a graduate.
Definitely not a star. I was just one of those small, delicate characters who like to exchange views in the middle while the stars are doing things with the ball. That's kind of what I did. Exchanging blows by way of verbiage and general academic joy, as you can imagine.
There you go. I can imagine. It sounds idyllic. So onto your career then. Assuming all the fun and education has happened by this point.
Yeah, um, I got home for Christmas and my father gently said to me, "I'm not keeping you. Have you got a job?" And the answer was no, I didn't have a job. So I rang someone who'd actually offered me a start on the milk round, as it used to be called, which is the old graduate circulation thing. And I'd been offered an opportunity by the rank organization. And I'd only actually ever gone to the interview because I needed some interview practice. So I rang this guy up. He was called Peter Campbell. And I said, "I don't know if you remember me, Mr. Campbell. Um, we met about 6 months ago. I wondered, have you still got an opportunity?" And he said, "Well, I've changed divisions. I'm no longer with rank. I'm now with top rank, and I run the bingo division. So if you'd like to become a trainee bingo hall manager, you can start on the 2nd of January." So I did. I became a trainee in whatever they call them, trainee bingo hall manager in Halifax on the 2nd of January.
Oh, how wonderful. Did you get to call the numbers out?
Well, you see, it's an incredibly highly regulated um, industry because it's recognized as gambling. And back in the time, I mean, I'd never lived in Halifax. I'd never been in Halifax. I'd never been in a bingo hall, come to that. So I kind of rocked up, found myself somewhere to live or somewhere to stay, and arrived into one of the bingo halls in Halifax. There were two, and we ran them both. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, I was literally a fortnight off the plane, so I was there in this huge leather jacket, built like you wouldn't believe, with a really strange looking haircut, looking very fit and tanned and difficult, and was then introduced as the new trainee manager. And people in Halifax sort of went, "Who's this idiot?" So that was kind of the start to what you've euphemistically called my career.
Well, it worked, you know, it got you out of your father's hands.
Well, yes, I had of somewhere to go and something to do. So yeah, it was a. I mean, if you want to learn about customer service, if you want to learn about people, then work in a people business. I mean, Broad Street Club on a Tuesday night in Halifax, we would have 12 or 1300 people in. And when you're playing for £50,000, yeah, you can learn a lot about people.
Mm. And people have pretty much been at the heart of everything that you've done ever since, really. Um,
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think, however, however we want our lives to be, most of us can't get away from people. So you might as well get on with them and try and be a pleasure to deal with, because actually being difficult rarely adds value.
mhm. Yeah, I completely agree with you on that one as well. Um, and then, so right, let's think straight. But you went, when did you go to?
Well, no, no, you see, you can't do the think straight with my alleged career. Because I'd actually been interviewed just before Christmas when I joined the bingo hall for the civil service. And I'd had a letter which, from memory, arrived on Christmas Eve, and it said, "You've passed the interview stage, but until we do various security checks, don't give up your full-time employment." Now, obviously, I had no full-time employment, so I'd obviously started in the bingo hall, and so I did a year with bingo, and got a letter in about October the following year saying, um, "You've now passed the security checks." And we've allocated you as a trainee inspector in the health and safety executive. Because obviously that's a natural progression, bingo hall trainee manager to health and
Absolutely,
safety
of
executive.
course, yeah.
Um, so I found myself, luckily enough, it was the same county at least, moving to a place called North Allerton in North Yorkshire, uh, to become a trainee inspector for the health and safety executive.
And how did you find that?
Um, well, my first day, I walked into an office and was greeted by three gentlemen, all of whom were over 55, two of whom were smoking pipes. So I couldn't actually see them clearly through the haze in the room. And actually, the health and safety executive is a very serious job, but if you've got a sense of humor, it kind of helps you deal with what you come across, because there's nothing like a good accident to help things along. Obviously, the other problem with all of this is that occasionally you finish out having to go out to fatalities and deal with what's left behind when somebody has made decisions that frankly has killed them. And then you have to investigate the accident, prosecute the guilty, and I was trained as a prosecutor. I was a warrant carrier. And you sometimes have to stand in courts and tribunals and listen to families cry because of losing part of their family. So there were extremes to the HSE. From my side of things, the challenge of investigation, the joy of the law, was something I'd never come across. And the fact that they let me loose to talk to human beings and to try and advise them how not to kill themselves, for me was a much more interesting part of the job.
Mm. And what sort of environments were they? Were they science related, or was it all manner
Well,
of?
I actually started off in a rural group doing agricultural inspections. My first ever fatality investigation was someone who had managed to get a machine to come back on itself, and he was underneath it at the time. And I'm not going to paint any more gruesome a picture than that, except to say it was on a Saturday morning, and I missed a cricket match because I had to go out and investigate the accident. And of course, this was back in the day before mobile phones. So I got the phone call at home, and of course, you pick up the phone. Sorry. As you used to, you pick up the phone, and this voice said, "This is the police." And my biggest concern was, what have I done? Because I was of that generation that a good old Northern Irish guilt complex. And this voice went, "I believe you are the duty inspector. We have a fatality." So I spent my day, a beautiful sunny summer's day in my memory, um, measuring up and photographing before they removed the body and taking it from there.
Mm.
So I think we all laugh about things like the Darwin Awards. We all look at YouTube and social media in today's society and take pleasure one way or the other out of many people having accidents. But when you're at the hard end, when you've actually been there and sadly seen people who have actually managed to take themselves out of the gene pool, yeah, there's not so much pleasure in it sometimes.
No, it doesn't sound like it. And at any point when you were doing that, did you think, gosh, how does this relate to my degree?
Well, I mean, part of the conversation was the sciencey side of things and the environment I was working in. As an agricultural inspector, you also got to remember that I think that it's all about our competencies rather than the subjects that we work on along the way. Because over my generation, things have evolved and we've learned so much more. I mean, somewhere in the house, I have a couple of old medical textbooks that came out of my grandfather's house, and they're dated 1890 something. And you pick up those textbooks and you look at them, and you can automatically see it's simply wrong. You
Mm.
know, we have science continues to evolve and learn, and as do we as people. And certainly during my journey, I started off in the agricultural inspectorate. I did some engineering stuff. I joined the construction group. Um, and I also reached some conclusions that the way I wanted to work was not to investigate accidents and prosecute people. It was to actually get communications to the stage where people would actually protect themselves properly. And that's to evolve. I started to run projects. I went to exhibitions, learned to speak in public, and along the way, I picked up a couple of months on as an exchange student and went to the Philippines to look at health and safety there. And yeah, that was interesting to see health and safety in industry in a completely different culture
Mhm.
was part of my learning. And the year I came back, I did about 60, 65 talks about what I'd seen. And that was that was a learning in itself because I learned to be almost competent as a speaker. And also, if you have a certain tone and a certain way of telling a story, people will invite you to hear and hopefully learn a little bit from what you say. I mean, as the great philosopher Frank Carson said, it is the way you tell them. And that's just one of those things, isn't it?
I think so. Um, let's see. I don't dare ask you what happened next. I feel like I should just
Well,
normal.
as we've started out so badly, I'll continue to rattle along. I realized how little I knew about the world of business, so I got myself put on a couple of postgraduate diploma courses in management. And I also fell in with some very bad company one night at a conference I was speaking at, and we started our own organization and we started to take teams to East Africa and build schools and hospitals in our holidays. And that was underneath part of the Rotary banner, which is an organization I've been linked to in various ways now for over 30 years.
So you went out with a team to build schools in Africa.
Yeah, well, I mean, building in itself, building well is an art,
Mhm.
but building per se is something with a little bit of common sense. A lot of people can do. And what we used to do is I would meet and greet people, and they would hear me tell stories, and they would say things like, "Oh, we'd love to do that," and I would go, "Okay, join us." And some people came once. Because working with me on a building site for 3 weeks and 35 degrees is not everybody's idea of how to spend your holiday. And some people, I mean, there was a hardcore of about 5 or 6 of us who did 10 or 12 trips together. And yeah, we built schools and hospitals in East Africa.
Wow. And do you stay in touch with any of them? Are they still running?
Well, thanks to the joy of the Rotary Network, we have supported all those projects long term. And the gentleman I mentioned who I first fell in with and who had the gem of the idea finished up on being the president of Rotary in Britain and Ireland and went on to the international board, a guy called Brian Stoyle. And Brian and I are still friends, and we're just a little bit older and grayer than we were when we first met back in the 90s.
Excellent. So when did you first set foot inside the BASF building?
Cut to the chase. You see, there's a whole series of iterations even to get to that.
Yeah.
Um, as you can imagine from the stories so far, because I got into communications and started to get into communications with the HSE and realized I didn't fit, I then got the chance to.
By what do you mean you didn't fit?
Well, because the HSE's world is all about it's not just about selling the idea, it's all about investigation, it's all about prosecution. And actually I reckoned I could be so much more effective by winning hearts and minds.
Mhm.
And because I got into the communication side of things, I got offered the chance to join a PR agency because obviously that's a natural progression, health and safety inspector, PR agency. So I joined a PR agency, did a couple of years with them. Um, I just realized how little I actually knew. Joined a couple of more agents, my own little business. And while I was doing my own business, I did an MBA as well because to give myself a grasp of more to do with business. And then I'd been doing that for a few years. And then a company called BASF rang me up and said, "We have an opportunity."
Wow.
And I said, "Why would a tape company want to talk to me?" Because frankly, I wasn't a chemist and I wasn't exactly engaged in that industry. Um, and I went along, had a meeting. I'm going to call it a meeting rather than an interview because I think if you talk to the people who tried to interview me, it was a pretty fair fight. Uh, I I still occasionally see the person who gave me my first job in BSF, and she's got a lot to answer for. She's very wonderful, and I thank her greatly for the opportunity.
What's her name?
Diane. And funny enough, the last time I saw her, it wasn't her at all. I bumped into her twin sister at Murrayfield. I didn't even know she had a twin sister, and I find myself talking to this completely strange woman, calling her Diane, and she then informed me that Diane was her twin sister. So there's a properly strange story. That was
Mhm.
before the match as well, so I was able to recognize her. Say no more.
It was Diane that gave you the job.
Absolutely. Diane gave me my first job in BASF, and I joined BASF as the communication manager in the agricultural division.
Hmm. And then you were there for more than 20 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always had this great belief that corporate organizations were great black boxes full of incredibly competent people. And the reality of the conversation is it is a great black box full of competent people. The challenge sometimes is to find those competent people. And I was very lucky along my journey. I started off in the communication side of things. Um, I finished up moving sort of sideways a little bit and I picked up more responsibilities. And then BSF believe in looking after people and training them. So I was put through a series of mangles and ringers and did a number of uh, assessment centers, I suppose you'd call them. And it was at a time where the organization was restructuring, and the vice president, was he vice president or senior vice president then? He may even have been an SVP. A Danish guy called Torben Jensen had seen me along the way and realized that I could add something. He never actually told me what I added, but I added something. And so he moved me out of the division into the umbrella structure, the body corporate. And we then entered a time that was back in about 2007, 8, so around there. BSF had started an acquisition trail, and we were buying businesses one or two a year. And for me, as part of the body corporate, I mean, it was a fast track to a merger and acquisition MBA because we were traveling Europe, integrating businesses into BASF. It was an absolutely incredible experience. You know,
Mhm.
we built businesses within personal care, within construction. We added businesses within agriculture, within the chemical organization. Yeah, it was really, really interesting.
I bet. And that did that lead to another position in the company or?
Well, because I'm a great believer in understanding how little I understand. I had just before I joined the corporate platform, I had a chat with Diane about something I was working on, which was customer relationship management, and I'd spotted a number of things that I was really quite interested in, and I pitched at Diane the idea that she should let me do a doctorate and write that up as part of the conversation. So along the way, I wrote my doctorate in personal networking and networks. That sounds a
Wow.
bit strange, doesn't it? But it's an excuse to get a wine budget. Would that
Just
help, Harriet?
just say that again. You did your doctorate in personal network.
Networking and how
Um,
to deliver corporate strategy based on relationships.
I see. Yeah, certainly. Lots of wine involved in that.
Absolutely. I mean, if you ask my kids today what I do for a living, they will say that dad drinks tea with interesting people. You know, as far as they're concerned in this house, that's a real job.
Gosh, I wonder what'll happen when they meet with reality.
Well, they'll not drink as much tea as I have done over the last 10 years, that's for sure.
No. Likewise, I'm sure. You're here with me, Harriet Gould, for the Lab Matters podcast. If you like what you hear, please rate us on your favourite podcast platform. Um, so let's see, where are we up to? Have we got to sustainability director yet?
No, but thank you
Okay.
for asking. So, so what happened? And of course, along the way, Torben asked me to take responsibility for Northern Europe for health and safety. And of course, within BASF, I had no history of health and safety. So the experts, and frankly, they were experts, they knew their stuff inside and out, were slightly outraged when they were told that this communication idiot was going to take over health and safety. And therefore, there was an interesting conversation because, from my side of things, um, I was qualified, I had experience, but you have to, if you like, prove yourself. So, and we'd also just bought a number of organizations, including we'd merged with the SIBA organization. So when we did that, at that stage, I was responsible for, I think there was over 40 production sites in Northern Europe, and there was around 4,500 employees. And I was responsible for health and safety and communications and advocacy and across 10 countries.
Wow. Okay. Had your work cut out?
Um, if you talk to friends today, they would say I was going grey. My skin was going grey at that stage because I was probably on a plane most weeks. I was away from home 3 or 4 nights a week. And yes, I was working 16 to 20-hour days as standard. Um, not, it wasn't that I wasn't enjoying it. I just pushed very hard. I always have done.
Mm. You didn't for a moment think, gosh, I'll go back to Hawaii and play American football.
Um, I had got old by that stage and I'd started to slow down. One of the things you realize in sport is that eventually you think you can do things and frankly you can't. I mean, when I finished playing rugby in my late 40s, I used to always say that I could still see the gaps on the pitch, but they were gone by the time I got to them. So, and it's also it gets very strange because you end up meeting these young whippersnappers who frankly used to say things like, "Ah, yes, you used to play with my father," and you have to moderate your language and not use Anglo-Saxon at children like that, So it's one of those things.
So you're pushing hard. You're on a plane every week. You're
Yeah.
dealing with health and safety in multiple countries. Did you come across anything that you should repeat now?
Well, I think there's all sorts of good stuff, and again, there's some interesting cultural stuff. I remember we had a call that there'd been a rupture at one of the sites in Finland.
What
Uh,
does that mean? A
one of
rupture?
the tanks had actually broken,
Okay.
and of course it was the back end of January, and if, what normally happens is all hands to the pump, literally, possibly. We've got real issues. Da 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 da. We need to deal with this, and so I spoke to the production director, I spoke to the site manager, and they kind of went, "What's your panic?" And I'm going, "Well, how much? What?" And of course, the answer was, "Geoff, it's minus 30. Everything's frozen solid. Yes, there's been a rupture, but we'll just bring a digger in March and deal with it." And that was that was a really interesting learning point. Um, and of course, because the BASF business and the chemistry we're doing was, obviously, you've got mainstream, you've got proper chemistry, if you like, and we had production sites, but we've also got niches, we've got micro sites. I mean, we were breeding nematodes at a site on the south coast of England, for example, as a
Nematode?
biopest. Yeah, nematodes, little macroscopic worms. It's a biopesticide, and we had a number of sites producing fish oil across northern Europe as well. And again, you add in fish oil, you add in omega vitamins, you add in construction products, you add in insulation, you add in nematodes, you add in concrete additives. The portfolio of the average chemistry business is not what people immediately think about when they think about chemistry. And that's before I start talking about the customers, because when people start thinking about chemistry, they don't think about the lotions and potions they put on their face and body every morning. But I always like to smile to myself knowing that there is a product in the shops that a lot of people buy. It's a well recognized product and it is 100% BASF. but I don't see anybody saying, I must use that. It uses the best chemistry, because that's not how products are sold to the population.
What's the product?
I'm not telling you because, because that could damage all sorts of conversations. But the short answer is many of us have used it. I can promise you faithfully.
I'll keep
So, I
my
mean, and to pick up your question 10 minutes ago about sustainability, um, health and safety, the environment starts to move. And of course, BASF had taken some huge steps back in the early 90s to do with eco-efficiency analysis of their products. They then moved forward into a world of talking about how these things came together and societal value that started to appear. So for BASF, this was a journey. And by the time we got into sort of around 2010, 2011, the word sustainability was one that had appeared. People still thought I was weird because I used to talk about sustainability, and it was still a very untrendy word. I mean, today, the word sustainability, I mean, dear goodness, I've become trendy, Harriet. For the first time in my entire life, I've become trendy. I'm just too old to be trendy now. Um, so my reality was I evolved into a role that was growing in front of me because BASF were taking huge strides with how to manage their business and to understand what sustainability meant to their business. And that journey continues today.
Mhm. And how do you think that they did interpret it at the time? Was it roughly along the lines of what people are interpreting now, or were they still feeling their way? How did that process go?
Well, I mean, if you go back 30 years, obviously before you were born and when I had started work, there's a conversation there because sustainability kind of meant energy efficiency and it kind of meant not killing your employees. The health and safety stuff and what a good engineer does. And really, from that kind of stuff, I mean, today, most people don't have to talk about health and safety because it's kind of built into the DNA of most organizations, certainly industrial organizations. And the journey with sustainability has become much more than energy efficiency. And if you take the classic conversation around the Brundtland report, it was about ecology, it was about economy, and it was about the social aspect and how that triumvirate fitted together. And the BASF evolution from eco-efficiency analysis through into looking at sea balance and bringing in the societal measures and the value to society is a key part of that because our society won't exist without chemists and chemistry. And whether that's the lotions and potions, whether that's the paint in our car, whether that's the plastic on our computers, whether that's the pen, the clothes, the textiles. Frankly, chemists are to blame for building our society as we know it today.
Wow. How are we gonna um how are we gonna share that with the masses? I don't know. Um, we need to change some things, but I think, plastic, for example, gets a bit of a bad reputation, but plastic I think is very useful. If cars didn't have plastic, then they'd be too heavy and use more fuel.
Well, there's a wonderful clip from a film called Mrs. Robinson, um, and it actually one of the characters turns to the graduate
Mhm.
in the film, The Graduate, when he's talking about it, and he says, "The future is plastics." And actually, that was 75 years ago.
Mhm.
The reality is absolutely right. I mean, we have taken a very useful piece of technology and it's become ubiquitous in our society. You know, Here we are using this technology, how we build our homes, our transport, even how we package our food, our retail offerings, what we're dressed in. So much of it is linked to polymer technology and plastics. And actually, we haven't respected the science. We've treated plastics incredibly badly. And we've now got to the stage where we have not recycled, we have not used them properly. and we're now having to think very seriously about that. So I won't disagree with you that they have a bad reputation. I think I would challenge how they got that reputation. That's part of that conversation.
Hmm. So let's put you in that graduate situation now. Um, what does the future look like? Not just for plastics, but for the world of science as a whole, professionally and personally.
Um, let's pick up the world of science, and you touched on it. I I do some work in education, and I see too many young people not talking about science. I see them talking about sport. I see them talking about social media influencing. But actually, science as a production, as a creative enterprise, should be part of that. We have to make scientists trendy. We have to make them aspirational. Um, and somewhere along the line, we've taught our children that science is difficult and science is something that is very straight-laced. No, it's not. If you want to be creative and you really want to play with things, let's get into science. Let's experiment. Let's have a go at things. Let's create the next world that we want. I'm a raging optimist, which possibly comes across during this conversation. And therefore, frankly, I do believe that science will solve our problems if we let it. I suppose I can be very cynical and also say that the political establishment managed to annoy me on a regular basis by putting barriers in the way to science producing the end product we want to. And going back to, I think, the um, conversation we were having, if you take the plastic side of things, the answer is we can use it properly, we can recycle it, we can design things for sustainability, and we can stop the linear society of consumerism. We can look at a much more circular conversation and look at how we use resources. And part of that is also about things like green electricity, green transport. We all know about it. And if you do a survey, lots of people will say, yes, 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 we support that. And people will support most things up until the moment where we point firmly at them and go, do it now. I mean, I would gently remind you that when we come out of the horrendous time at COVID, the first thing people did was jump on planes. We had seen our skies get cleaner, and suddenly we were leaping on planes. We were talking about, have we learned anything from COVID? Well, frankly, we did, but we forgot it pretty quickly.
Mm. It's a difficult one, isn't it? I always think that with something like air travel, we need to be all the more visionary, you know? We should have aeroplanes that cleanse the atmosphere rather than pollute it. And it wouldn't
And
matter if we went.
one of the challenges, and in the current conversation, one of the challenges is when I talked about that wonderful triumvirate of ecology, economy, and the social side of things, the economy piece, someone has to pay. And there are much more clever people than I, but the reality of the conversation is we need to invest. We need to invest for the long term. I talk to people I know, I talk to friends, I talk to colleagues who work in science and in chemistry. And I'm sorry, but 2-year contracts, 18-month research projects, that is no way to think long term. If we're serious about how we bring green energy to our society, we need a framework set for us by the establishment, political and otherwise, which has to have a generational bias.
Mhm.
And that's not the length of time of a damned parliament. We need to be thinking about 25 years from now. Let's be honest, we've seen some of the parliaments in the last while be 25 weeks. It's ridiculous. And we really have to ensure that we get that balance right and we invest for all our futures, for mine and for our children's. Because, I intend to live here for quite a while and to be difficult for years yet, thank you.
Well, it's certainly something that I will look forward to, Geoff.
I mean, there's things that everyone can do. We have to understand the choices we make. Um, and I don't mean in monetary terms, environmental footprint, carbon footprint, just thinking about things. I mean,
Mm,
I've got to the stage where my children are teenagers, and what interests me most is they do take things from my wardrobe because they've come back into fashion.
mm.
And that has entertained me thoroughly in the last few years. I never thought I'd see the day either, but such is life.
So, final words, final thoughts.
Um, Science has to be invested in, and scientists have to be invested in. And we have to celebrate failure as a learning opportunity as much as we celebrate success. If we're talking about some of the things, go back to the 50s and 60s, would we choose to develop the plastics industry the way we have? Possibly not. But we are where we are. And therefore, what we have to do now is do things differently.
Mm,
You know, would we choose to keep on producing plastic? Well, no, we'd recycle it, we'd reuse it, we'd put a value better on it, we'd build an infrastructure for recycling, we'd look at better educating people. And when we talk about that, there is a whole conversation about how we deal with one of the problems that is with us at the moment, which is climate change.
mhm.
And the answer is there are solutions. We can all make a small difference. But as Dave Brailsford in Sky Cycling would have said, lots and lots of small differences add up.
Science of
And that's
marginal
the
gain.
conversation. And we have to be positive. We have to look after our fellow human beings in all sorts of ways and continue to have a cup of tea and smile on occasion.
Very wise words, Geoff. Thank you so very much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope we get to speak again soon.
The pleasure will be mine, I'm sure. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'll speak to you soon. All the best.